Good morning. It is Friday, December the 14th, and this is The Drill. Thank you very much. This is Ron, your host, the only true conservative in the United States of America today, because I'm the only one that makes the presumption for the status quo. Speaking to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers, and right now we're going to, we're going to start with some clips from the Rush Limbaugh show.
After Comey is fired, he then helps engineer the hiring of Robert Mueller as special counsel by leaking classified information. Guess what Comey does now? Comey is teaching ethics at William and Mary College. Ethics. After bragging about the fact that they set up a 30-year military hero by not even asking the White House counsel if they could come over and conduct an interview with Flynn. They just strolled in. Hey, Mike, great to see you. Flynn says, hey, Andrew, what's happening, babe? And they start chatting. And from that, Robert Mueller charges Flynn with lying. All of a sudden, Trump has changed his mind on the defense budget, and he has told Mattis to submit a defense budget for the Pentagon of $750 billion. Now, the original defense budget was $733 billion. That's what Trump had previously said that he would support. Now he's asked Mattis to go back and resubmit $750. The upshot is that Trump is, if Pelosi and Schumer do not join him and authorize and agree to $5 billion for the wall, Trump is going to take it out of the military budget. The real target's been Trump all along, not Cohen. The real target all along has been Trump, not Flynn. The real target all along has been Trump, not Manafort. And the reason Trump has been the real target is because he won. He is personally detested for any number of reasons, but at the top of them is that he won. He's personally detested because so many millions of Americans voted for him and invested in him and thus turned their backs on the best and brightest in our country, the Washington establishment. Here's Luella in Clovis, New Mexico. You're next. It's great to have you. Hi.
Hi, Rush.
Hi.
It's an honor. Hey, I'm just calling because I wanted to thank you personally for what your EIB store did for my adult son who's battling cancer. I'll start with...
All right, well, we'll stop it right there. But a couple of things. First of all, when he's talking about, he gets it wrong when he's saying that Donald Trump is hated. He's hated for any one of a number of reasons, is what Rush Limbaugh was saying, and he's wrong. He's loved. He's adored, and the proof of that is all of the rallies that he goes to that have overflow crowds. Tens of thousands of people show up to his rallies. Also, the very fact that he was elected president says that he was and is loved. And so that's the way that Rush Limbaugh should have approached it. That if he's trying to say that the left hates him, I think there's a lot of people actually on the left that actually love him. They won't say it out loud. They won't say it in public, but they love him as much as people on the right. But what Rush Limbaugh should have said is that they're upset. The left is upset with Trump or wants to get rid of Trump because of his popularity, because he is loved. Also, again, he gets it wrong from the standpoint that they don't want to get rid of him. They don't want to prosecute him. And I'm talking about the socialists. Democrats in Congress may have a different idea. There's a difference between Democrats and socialists. The socialists want him to resign. That's what they're looking to do. Put enough pressure on the president to get him to resign. And that's what's going on with Flynn and Cohen, particularly with Cohen, is the idea of putting enough pressure on Donald Trump so that he loses support also in Congress or especially in the Senate, and that he will be less effective, and then put him in the position where he's really left with little or no choice but to resign. Because if he resigns, then it's tantamount to a confession. It's tantamount to confessing that he's an inept, that he's not a good president, and that his election was a fluke and or engineered by the Russians. That the only reason he was here was and elected was because of the Russians. And also, it gives, if he resigns, it gives the Democrats the opportunity to completely ignore his presidency and again say, since he resigned in disgrace, then nothing he did can be considered an accomplishment, and we'll just ignore it and basically rewrite history and just say, well, the first 2 years from the 2016 election were vacant. They just the Democrats just won't refer to it. It's a Russian technique or tactic. When somebody falls out of favor, they would go back to old photos and have them erased, have people erased out of photographs, and make it as though they never existed. So that's what the Democrats and the socialists are really looking for, is because, again, if they go in and they come out with the so-called long knives and try to have Trump removed from office with an impeachment or any type of force, they're going to end up with blood on their hands. And you can't go to cocktail parties with blood on your hands. Doesn't work. It's gauche. So they want to see him resign, and whether or not that's going to happen, stay tuned. We'll see. They're going to have some. The Democrats will have some clout for the next 2 years, and we'll see to what degree they're going to be able to make things happen. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from the Ayn Rand lexicon, also Breaking Bad, Badder Living Through Chemistry, and Philosophy and House, Everybody Lies, when I come back. And thank you very much. And the Ayn Rand lexicon is it's a glossary of Ayn Rand's concepts, the concepts that she deals with most often in her writing and in some of her novels. A lot of her Ayn Rand's writing was like her books. If you get a book, let's say for The New Intellectual, it's basically each chapter is an article that she's written, or it is transcripts from a speech that she had given. It isn't a book that she just sits down and writes beginning to end. She just basically gets material that she had already created and puts it into the book and edits it. So today's concept is deficit financing. The government has no source of revenue except the taxes paid by the producers. To free itself, for a while, from the limits set by reality, the government initiates a credit con game on a scale which the private manipulator could not dream of. It borrows money from you today, which is to be repaid with money it will borrow from you tomorrow, which is to be repaid with money it will borrow from you the day after tomorrow, and so on. This is known as deficit financing. It is made possible by the fact that the government cuts the connection between goods and money. It issues paper money, which is used as a claim check on actually existing goods. But that money is not backed by any goods. It is not backed by gold. It is backed by nothing. It is a promissory note issued to you in exchange for your goods to be paid by you in the form of taxes out of your future production. But I would correct her on one point. That's a point that I made yesterday, and that it is said, she says it's backed by nothing. No, not true. It is backed by confidence. Okay. The whole idea is that as long as people have confidence in the dollar, it works. It's just like a con game. As long as you have confidence in the trickster, everything goes smoothly, at least for the trickster. And one of the ways that they can make sure that people have confidence is they create a law that says you will have confidence in this money. It's called the legal tender law. And that means if you look at any bill of United States currency, there's a phrase on there that says, this note is legal tender for all debts, public and private. and that's from the legal tender law, which says that refusing to accept dollars to settle your debts is illegal. So if you go to a store and you want to buy something, some jewelry, let's say, and you give them cash, you give them paper money, they cannot say, I'm sorry, we don't take paper money. You've got to give us gold. You've got to give us silver. You've got to give us something that has some intrinsic value. If they do that, they're breaking the law, and they could be prosecuted. So when I come back, I'm going to be, we'll start with Breaking Bad, Badder Living Through Chemistry. Thank you very much. So let's see. We are still on about Walt and Walt's faults, and whether or not, to what degree he's responsible for, and this has also a deterministic angle on it, whether or not Walt is forced to do the things that he does, or does he have free will? And so this part of the chapter is called Delayed Redemption. We've got rot, Walt calls up to Walter Jr. through a hole in the floor of their family home. Rot? Walter Jr. responds. Yeah, here. I'll show you. Here. Take a look at that, Walt says, passing his son a piece of wood that he's excised from the bowels of their home. Walter Jr. continues to look puzzled as his dad explains to him how the rot is caused by fungus that ultimately threatens the integrity of the physical structure of the home. Quote, is the whole house gonna collapse or something, unquote? Walter Jr. asks. Quote, not if I can help it, unquote, Walter replies. In the meantime, Skylar, another integral part of Walt's home, his wife, is engaging behavior that threatens to undermine his integrity. Walt's efforts to eliminate fungus from his home, while Skylar engages in an affair with Ted Beneke, her boss, poetically mirrors Walt's personal struggle for redemption. As Walt irradiates the cancer-causing rot to his physical self, another part of him is engaging in behavior resulting in rot of a different sort. The rot, caused by Skylar and Walt's free choices, persists no matter how fresh, strong, and new is the physical structure of Walt's home or body. It's the rotting tendencies that linger. Walt's vain mission to secure the physical integrity of his home seems to come to an end when, in the parking lot of Rack's building supply, he warns a would-be meth cook, quote, stay out of my territory, unquote. We see that Walt's physical condition doesn't dictate the tendencies that guide his choices. These tendencies are strong, and they persist, despite Walt's remission. Are these tendencies determined by Walt's chemistry? Are they choices Walt is predetermined to make? The Heisenberg uncertainty principle suggests that these questions may be fundamentally unanswerable. Yet the tendencies and choices to which these questions refer remain morally relevant. The tendencies and choices referred to in these questions are the tendencies and choices that will determine Walt's redemption. They are morally relevant precisely because the answers to these questions are fundamentally uncertain. If we can't with certainty say that they are governed by chemistry and therefore predetermined, then in the absence of any certain cause, we must conclude that our free choice is the only thing that can save him, or that can change them. So, again, we get into the determinism arguments, and by the author here honors determinism. There's some arguments or discussions you don't get involved in, okay? Because to get involved in the argument or discussion is to concede the point. Just getting involved in it. For instance, you're a Christian and somebody comes to you and says, let's debate the existence of God. Tempting, right? Okay, let's do that. Whoops, you already lost the argument right there. And the reason you lost the argument is by agreeing to have an argument, you've conceded the possibility that God does not exist, and therefore undercut your entire argument. Now you're back to proving negatives. You're back to doing things that are impossible. And it's the same thing with determinism. You can't argue against determinism. If you try to, you validate determinism. Same thing happens with skepticism. You argue skepticism, then you're going to end up validating it. The only thing that you can really do with it is, because ultimately people that profess skepticism and people that profess determinism, among other things, are fundamentally liars. What they're saying is that either they don't see reality, they don't understand reality, or what is more likely is they're not sure, that they're neutral. I'm neutral on reality. They don't usually come out and say, "Hey, reality doesn't exist." What they'll say is, "How do we know?" They'll ask the question, "How do we know? How do we know? How do we know anything?" And so in their and thereby they so anyways, if you entertain that argument that it's not even an argument, it's a lie, and if you entertain it, you're validating it. Okay, so you got to remember and be able to tell people that it's a lie. If you're at home, again, you got to remember where it is that you are when you're engaging somebody on the left. If you're in your own house, feel free to flat out call them a liar. If you're at home or at work, that's a little bit of a delicate situation. You don't want to be in a position where you find yourself having to talk to your supervisor or explain things to human resources. So you might use the word fiction. I'm sorry, but that's just fiction. Okay. Or you could ask them the question, "You don't really expect me to take this seriously, do you?" That's another way of putting it. And it puts across the same message. And you don't engage, you don't entertain any of it, because it's just, you end up going down an intellectual rat hole. And that's what he's ending up doing here. It is obvious that in this particular show that the character Walt has free choice. He can choose to do a whole number of things. And because free will is axiomatic, it's obvious, and that's all there is to it. So when I come back, I'm going to be reading from House, Philosophy in House. Everybody Lies. Thank you very much. And in this segment, it's called Musem and Abduction. And this in this chapter, the author is comparing House, the main character of the show House, the title character, comparing and contrasting him to Sherlock Holmes. House's team stands by and watches him in near disbelief. They think he's mad. They're right. He is. And he shares this with Holmes as well. Holmes is actually doubly mad. His mind is strongly divided, as though there were two Sherlock Holmeses inside him. One of these is mad with energy and intensity when tracking clues. "Come, Watson, come," he cried. "The game is afoot. Not a word. Into your clothes and come." The other Holmes is the opposite, not mad with energy, but contemplative, dreamy, even hallucinatory. Watson describes these two sides. Quote, "In his singular character, the dual nature alternately asserted itself, and his extreme exactness and astuteness represented, as I have often thought, the reaction against the poetic and contemplative mood which occasionally predominated in him. The swing of his nature took him from extreme languor to devouring energy." Unquote. At first, Watson doesn't quite understand what's going on with the strange swing of Holmes's mind, but gradually he learns this zombie-like trance is an essential and prior step to solving any very difficult case. After assimilating clues in the hunt, Holmes will retreat to his rooms on Baker Street and sink deeply into his armchair, listening to music with, quote, "a dreamy, vacant expression in his eyes," unquote. Pierce calls this pre-abductive dream state musement, and defines it as the pure play of the imagination. After all, the clues have been gathered, the detective must pull back from the case, relax his eyes, and retreat into his imagination. There, wild visions and diagrammatic scenarios of causality flash by. All the results and all the possible rules are shuffled about as the detective looks for the perfect fit. Likewise with House, he too has two sides, although they're not nearly as extreme as those of Holmes. At one moment, House is mad with energy, standing before the whiteboard with all the possible diagnoses written before his team, yelling at Cameron and Chase and Foreman, yelling at Cuddy, and even swatting them with his cane. But then he'll stop. almost all of a sudden, and retreat back to his office, kick back, and enter the Holmesian amusement state, gently waving his hand back and forth, drifting in a logical delirium as he listens to John Henry Giles's jazz recording, as he did in the episode DNR. This scene in House was virtually taken right out of Conan Doyle's, quote, The Red-Headed League, unquote. Quote, all afternoon he sat in the stalls wrapped in the most perfect happiness, gently waving his long, thin fingers in time to the music, while his gently smiling face and his languid, dreamy eyes were as unlike those of Holmes, the sleuth-hound, Holmes, the relentless, keen-witted, red-handed criminal agent, as it was possible to conceive, unquote. Entering either the amusement state or the sleuth-hound state, Holmes was also known to rely on intoxicating drugs. House's drug of choice is Vicodin, partly because it kills pain and allows him to focus on the details of the case, but also for its euphoric and relaxing contemplative effects. In other words, because it enhances the amusement state and allows him to form better, uncoded abductions. So, with that, we come to the conclusion of another episode of The Drill, and until next time, I thank you for listening, and have a great day.